The sky above New York was brushed in soft gold as Flight 327 prepared for takeoff. The massive passenger jet gleamed under the morning sun, its silver body reflecting the light like a promise of adventure. Inside the cabin, the steady hum of engines mixed with the murmur of hundreds of passengers settling into their seats. Some scrolled through their phones, others flipped open books, while a few drifted into quiet conversations about business meetings, family visits, or long-awaited vacations in London. Among them sat Emma Collins, just 18 years old, a girl with wide, curious eyes and a calm face that carried both excitement and nervous energy. It was her first time flying alone, and she had barely told anyone except her mom. She sat by the window, tracing patterns in the clouds forming outside as the aircraft slowly taxied to the runway. Her seatbelt clicked shut, her heart raced. As the engines roared to life, Emma whispered under her breath, "Here we go." Moments later, the jet lifted from the ground, breaking free from the earth and climbing into the sky. The city of New York faded beneath a blanket of clouds. Passengers clapped softly, as they often did when the takeoff went smooth. The captain's calm voice came over the intercom, rich with professionalism and ease. "Greater than, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. Welcome aboard Flight 327 bound for London Heathrow. Estimated flight time, 6 hours, 35 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy your journey." A wave of comfort washed through the cabin. Flight attendants smiled as they rolled carts down the aisle, offering drinks and snacks. Children laughed softly as they pressed their faces to the windows. It felt peaceful, the kind of peace that makes you forget how fragile life can be. For the first 3 hours, everything went perfectly. Emma watched the endless blue horizon, her headphones playing soft music. She imagined what London would be like, the fog, the accents, the cobblestone streets she'd only seen in movies. She was halfway between childhood and adulthood, halfway between two continents, and everything seemed beautifully endless. Then, somewhere over the Atlantic, something changed. It began with a faint noise, a quick, sharp thud from the cockpit, so soft that most passengers didn't even notice. Emma didn't either, but inside that sealed space, just a few feet away from the first-class cabin, the captain had suddenly stopped speaking mid-sentence while communicating with air traffic control. His hand, once steady on the throttle, trembled. His vision blurred. He gasped, once, then twice, and collapsed sideways onto the controls. Warning lights flashed red, a shrill alarm pierced the air. The co-pilot, First Officer Daniels, reacted instantly, trying to stabilize the aircraft. "Captain, Captain," he shouted, shaking the man's shoulder, but the captain's eyes were closed, his face pale. Daniels grabbed the radio, his voice tight. "Greater than, Mayday, Mayday, this is Flight 327, Captain unconscious," repeating, "Captain unconscious." But before he could finish, a wave of dizziness swept through him too. His words slurred, his grip loosened. He managed to switch the plane to autopilot, just barely, before his own body went limp against the seat. Inside the cabin, the turbulence began. The seatbelt sign flashed. A few passengers gasped as their cups spilled, coffee sloshing over tray tables. The plane dipped slightly, then steadied, the autopilot fighting to maintain balance. A flight attendant rushed toward the cockpit, knocking on the locked door. "Captain, everything all right?" No response. She tried again, louder this time. "Captain." The silence behind that door felt heavier than anything she had ever heard in her career. Inside the cabin, murmurs spread like ripples in water. "What's happening?" someone whispered. "I think it's just turbulence," another replied, forcing a nervous smile. Emma looked up. She could feel something wasn't right, not just the turbulence, but a strange stillness that hung in the air. The attendants, usually so calm and rehearsed, now exchanged frightened glances. One of them hurried to pick up the phone and contact the cockpit again, no answer. Minutes passed, stretching like hours. The passengers were growing restless. A child started crying softly. A man pressed the call button again and again, demanding to know what was happening. The engines hummed steadily, but the sense of security was gone, replaced by a quiet, rising fear. Inside the cockpit, alarms continued flashing. Oxygen levels were stable, fuel normal, but the pilots were motionless. The plane, a giant mechanical heart in the sky, was flying itself, but only for now. Finally, the chief flight attendant, trembling, made a decision that would change everything. She unlocked the emergency communication system, a last resort tool that connected the cabin to everyone on board. She pressed the button. The speakers crackled to life, filling the cabin with static. Every passenger looked up. Her voice came through, shaky, uneven. Greater than, ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We are experiencing a technical situation in the cockpit. The moment she said, cockpit, the entire cabin went silent. Emma's heart began to pound. She turned to the old woman beside her, who clutched her rosary tightly, lips moving in prayer. The child behind her whimpered. The man across the aisle whispered, what does she mean by technical situation? The attendant hesitated, as if choosing her next words carefully. Then came the sentence no passenger ever expects to hear. Greater than, if there is anyone on board with aviation or pilot training experience, please make yourself known immediately. A collective gasp filled the cabin. Emma froze. The words echoed in her head. Aviation training. Her heart skipped. She thought of the endless hours she'd spent in her father's small simulator set up back home, flying through virtual storms, landing imaginary planes, pretending to be a pilot just for fun. It was never supposed to be real. It was just a hobby. A dream. But now, 300 lives hung in the balance. She could hear the attendants moving fast up front, knocking again and again on the cockpit door. No response. Somewhere, a baby started crying. A man shouted, "What's going on in there?" Another passenger stood up, pacing. The air felt thick, heavy with fear. Emma's palms were sweating. Her mind was racing faster than her heartbeat. Could she even do something? Could she help? The loudspeaker crackled again, the attendant's voice breaking under pressure. Greater than, please, if anyone has any flight experience at all, we need your help, right now. Emma took a deep breath, her pulse thundering in her ears. Her body trembled, but something inside her, something small and quiet, whispered back. Emma's legs trembled as she stood up from her seat, every eye around her turning to watch. For a second, she almost sat back down, the weight of fear pressing hard against her chest. But something stronger than fear began to take hold. A quiet, steady courage. She stepped into the aisle. The cabin was chaos. People were crying, whispering prayers, calling out names of loved ones. The overhead lights flickered as turbulence shook the plane again, trays rattling, cups rolling down the floor. A flight attendant saw Emma coming and reached out, her face pale. "Ma'am, please sit down. It's not safe right now." Emma's voice came out shaky but determined. Greater than, I have some flight experience. Not real, just simulators. But I can help. The attendant froze, eyes widening. For a moment she didn't know whether to believe her. But then another jolt shook the aircraft, and fear stripped away hesitation. She nodded quickly. "Come with me. Hurry." Emma followed her down the aisle toward the front of the plane. The noise of panic faded behind her, replaced by the hum of machinery and the low roar of the engines. Her heartbeat was so loud it almost drowned everything else out. When they reached the cockpit door, the chief flight attendant was there, pounding her fist against it. "Captain Daniels, please respond," she shouted again. Nothing. No movement. Emma stepped closer. "Can you open it?" The attendant looked at her with trembling hands. "Only with the emergency override code. But if the pilots are incapacitated." Emma swallowed hard. "Then we don't have a choice." After a tense pause, the attendant entered the override code. A mechanical click sounded, and the heavy door slid open slowly. The air inside was different, colder, sharper, filled with the scent of metal and electronics. The cockpit lights glowed red from warning indicators. Both pilots slumped in their seats, unmoving, oxygen masks dangling from above. Emma gasped softly, "Oh my God." The attendant pressed her fingers to the captain's neck, searching for a pulse. "He's alive," she whispered, "but weak." The co-pilot too. Emma's eyes moved over the panels, hundreds of buttons, switches, glowing screens. To anyone else it would have been incomprehensible chaos. But to her, it wasn't completely foreign. She had spent years memorizing simulator layouts, studying flight tutorials for fun. She recognized the throttles, the yoke, the altitude dials, even the autopilot panel. She took a deep breath. Greater than, okay, autopilot's on. Altitude stable. The attendant stared at her like she was seeing a ghost. "You can really read all that." "Mostly," Emma admitted. "I've never done this for real, but I know how it works." The radio crackled suddenly, making both of them jump. Greater than, Flight 327, this is air traffic control, we've lost contact with your pilots. Please respond. Emma looked at the headset lying near the co-pilot's arm. She hesitated, then picked it up, her hands shaking. Hello, This is Flight 327. The captain and co-pilot are both unconscious. I'm a passenger. There was a long pause. Then a calm, professional voice replied. Greater than, copy that, Flight 327. Passenger, please identify yourself. Emma Collins. Greater than, okay, Emma. Listen to me very carefully. Are you in the cockpit now? Yes. Greater than, good. First thing, check if the plane is stable. What's your altitude and speed? Emma scanned the instruments like she'd done 1,000 times in her simulator. Altitude 34,000 feet. Airspeed 460 knots. Heading east, steady. Greater than, excellent. You're doing great, Emma. We're going to help you land this plane safely, okay? You're not alone. She nodded, tears threatening to blur her vision. Okay. Greater than, do you have anyone else who can assist you up? There. Emma glanced at the attendant, who was pressing an oxygen mask over the captain's face. Just the crew, but they're helping the pilots. Greater than, understood. Emma, listen carefully. Keep the plane on autopilot for now. We'll guide you step by step. You're doing perfectly fine. Emma wiped her forehead, trying to keep her breathing steady. Outside the windshield, clouds drifted like slow-moving mountains. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in orange and crimson, a terrifyingly beautiful view for a moment like this. The intercom buzzed again. Greater than, passengers, this is your crew speaking. Please remain seated and calm. We are receiving guidance from ground control. In the cabin, whispers turned into stunned silence. People looked at one another in disbelief. A teenager, barely an adult, was in the cockpit, flying the plane. Back in the cockpit, Emma's hands hovered over the controls. Greater than, air traffic control, what happened to the pilots? Greater than, medical emergency, Emma. Possibly hypoxia or contamination in the oxygen system. But right now, your job is to keep that plane steady until we bring you down. The air grew heavier. The plane rattled again, turbulence. Emma gripped the yoke instinctively. The whole jet tilted slightly to the left, and alarms blared. Her heart leapt. Greater than, it's banking. Greater than, stay calm, Emma. Counter gently to the right, slow, smooth motion. Don't fight the autopilot too hard. She did exactly as told, easing the yoke right. The plane straightened. The alarms faded. Greater than, good, nice correction. You've got it. A shaky smile broke through her fear. That actually worked. Greater than, you're a natural, Emma. You've got steady hands. She looked out again. The world was an endless sea of clouds and orange light. For a brief second, she felt like she could breathe again. But below them was the Atlantic Ocean, cold, vast, unforgiving. There was nowhere to land until they reached the European coast. She knew that, and they still had hours to go. The controller's voice returned, calm but urgent. Greater than, Emma, we're coordinating an emergency landing at Shannon Airport in Ireland. You'll begin descent in about 45 minutes. Until then, we'll go over every step together. She nodded again, focusing on the instruments. Her fear was still there, but something new had taken its place, resolve. Behind her, one of the attendants placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You're saving us, she whispered. Every one of us. Emma didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. Outside, the sky darkened, stars beginning to pierce through the fading light. Inside, alarms blinked like distant city lights. She checked every gauge, every dial, repeating to herself the same mantra she had whispered before. Greater than, you can do this, just like the simulator. The hum of the engines became her heartbeat. The steady rhythm of the controls became her pulse. For the first time since the chaos began, the massive jet was steady, under the hands of an 18-year-old girl who refused to give up. And as she watched the distant glow of the Irish coast begin to form far ahead, she whispered softly, almost to herself. The minutes crawled by like hours. The ocean below stretched into a dark, endless mirror, reflecting the last traces of daylight as Flight 327 crossed toward the Irish coast. Inside the cockpit, the tension was unbearable. Every second mattered. Every breath echoed louder than the engine's hum. Emma's hands remained firm on the controls, knuckles white, sweat dripping down her temples. Air traffic control stayed in her ear, guiding every move with calm precision. Greater than, you're doing great, Emma. We're almost there. Just stay focused. Her voice trembled slightly. Copy that. I see lights ahead. Far in the distance, through a thick layer of mist and rain, the runway lights of Shannon Airport shimmered like a line of stars on the ground, her only beacon of hope. It felt surreal. She had never even been in Ireland, never seen a real runway from this view, yet now she was about to land a jet carrying 300 souls. The voice on the radio came again, gentle but firm. Greater than, okay, Emma, listen carefully. Begin your descent now. Bring throttle back slowly, 10%. She followed. The massive jet shuddered as it began to dip its nose. Warning sounds blinked, one after another, filling the cockpit with a chorus of beeps. Greater than, altitude dropping, 2,000 feet, she read aloud, just as she'd practiced on the simulator. Greater than, perfect. Keep it steady. Lower your flaps to position 1. Her fingers found the flap lever. The plane slowed slightly, the engines adjusting automatically. Behind the cockpit door, the passengers could feel it too, the gentle downward tilt, the quiet drop in altitude. A mother held her child close. A businessman muttered a prayer. The old woman with the rosary whispered, God is guiding her. The attendants walked the aisle, voices calm but eyes wet. Greater than, please stay seated. Keep your seatbelts fastened. We are approaching for landing. No one moved. Every passenger sat frozen, clutching hands, crosses, phones, hearts, anything that could tether them to hope. Inside the cockpit, Emma's breathing grew heavier. The ground was coming fast. She saw the runway lights growing brighter, closer, but so did the storm. Wind whipped against the fuselage, rain striking the windows like bullets. Greater than, air control, I'm getting crosswinds. She cried. Greater than, stay calm, Emma. You'll need to correct. Slight left rudder, small adjustments, not big ones. She gritted her teeth, gently nudging the controls. The plane swayed violently, thunder rolling nearby. Lightning flashed, for a moment illuminating her face, pale but determined, eyes locked on the horizon. Greater than, altitude 10,000. Landing gear down. Emma reached for the lever and pulled. The gear lowered with a deep mechanical roar, followed by a reassuring green light on the panel. Greater than, gear down and locked. Greater than, excellent work, Emma. You're lined up perfectly. We're almost home. She almost smiled, but there was no time. The rain thickened, wipers struggling to keep up. The plane hit turbulence again, a violent drop that sent her stomach lurching. The alarms screamed. Greater than, autopilot disengaged. Flashed across the screen. Emma's heart skipped. It's off. I've lost autopilot. Greater than, okay, you're flying manual now. You can do this, Emma. Focus on the horizon, not the runway. Keep the nose steady. Her hands gripped the yoke tighter than ever. Every instinct, every hour of practice, every second of courage came together in that one moment. She whispered to herself. Greater than, you can do this, you have to. The aircraft dipped, wind fighting her every move. The nose tilted too far, alarms blared again. Passengers screamed as the plane jerked. Emma's voice rose, half fear, half fury. Come on, hold. She pushed the throttle gently, leveled the wings, and the plane steadied. For the first time, the runway was directly in front of her, bright, clear, calling her in. Greater than, 2,000 feet. Almost there, Emma. Start reducing speed. Speed reducing, she said, voice shaking. Greater than, 1,000 feet. You're aligned perfectly. Just keep her steady. The world outside blurred, rain, lights, wind, all melting into streaks of color. She could see the flashing emergency trucks waiting at the edge of the runway, their sirens glowing red and blue through the storm. Greater than, 500 feet. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She whispered a silent prayer. Greater than, 200. Okay, she breathed. Greater than, 100. Flare slightly, pull up just a bit. Don't slam it, let the plane settle. Emma eased the yoke back gently. The jet floated, almost hovering, then the wheels touched the ground with a heavy thud. The cabin erupted into gasps and cries. But Emma wasn't done yet. Greater than, reverse thrust, brakes, she said, almost mechanically. She pressed the levers. The engines roared backward, the massive jet slowing, 100 knots, 80, 60. The runway lights blurred through the rain. And then, silence. The plane came to a full stop. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The only sound was the rain tapping against the glass. Then, from the cabin behind her, came the sound of one person clapping. Then another. Then hundreds. A tidal wave of cheers and sobs filled the aircraft. People hugged each other, crying, shouting her name. Emma. She did it. She saved us. She landed the plane. Emma leaned back in the pilot's chair, trembling, tears streaming freely now. The radio crackled one last time. Greater than, Flight 327, this is Shannon Tower. Welcome to Ireland. You just made aviation history. Her laughter broke through the tears, disbelieving, relieved, exhausted. Greater than, we're safe. Greater than, you're safe, Emma. You brought everyone home. Outside, emergency crews rushed to the plane. The cockpit door opened, and the attendants ran in, throwing their arms around her. Cameras flashed from the windows, lights from rescue vehicles flooding in. When Emma finally stood and stepped into the cabin, the passengers erupted in applause again, louder, endless, unstoppable. Some reached out to touch her hand, others just whispered, "Thank you," through tears. The old woman with the rosary smiled up at her. "Greater than, God sent you to us," she said softly. Emma shook her head. "I just did what I had to." Hours later, as paramedics carried the unconscious pilots out safely and officials crowded around her with questions, Emma stood near the open door of the plane, breathing in the cold Irish air. The storm had passed. The sky was breaking open into dawn. Reporters would later call her, the Sky Angel, the teen who defied death, and the girl who landed Flight 327. But to her, it still felt unreal. When asked by a reporter how she stayed calm, she simply smiled and said, "Greater than, I didn't think. I just flew." And somewhere deep inside, she knew her life would never be the same again. That night, as news of her bravery spread across the world, filling headlines, newsfeeds, and hearts, millions watched the story of the young girl who did the impossible. An 18-year-old passenger who turned fear into strength. A quiet girl who took control of destiny. A hero who landed a jet and saved 300 lives.